He shared his sandwich with the old alien woman, never knowing she owned the galaxy. The morning Corporal Darren Ockhaffer shared his lunch with a beggar. He was running on 4 hours of sleep, a pulled hamstring, and the particular brand of irritation that comes from being assigned to the most pointless patrol route in the entire Terran Expeditionary Corps. He'd been at it since before dawn, logging his standard circuit through the VOS 7 transit hub, a gray, buzzing place that smelled of ionized metal and the collective anxiety of 10,000 species trying to board shuttles on time. Darren moved through the crowd with his hands in his jacket pockets and his collar up, which was technically not regulation, but which no one had ever cared enough to correct him about. He was a big man, wide at the shoulder, with a face that had been called stubbornly unimpressive by his last co, meaning he didn't look like much until you'd seen him move, and by then it was usually too late. He'd been awake through 2 consecutive shifts because his replacement, Private Ewan, had eaten something terrible at the commissary and was currently being attended to by a physician with low expectations. Darren didn't blame Ewan. He blamed the commissary. He blamed whoever decided that a protein paste labeled Earth-style comfort stew needed 11 ingredients from 6 different star systems. He was eating his own lunch at the transit hub's lowest observation deck, a half sandwich, real bread from the colony baker on level 3, actual chicken, actual mustard, when he saw her. She was sitting against the wall behind one of the cooling struts, a small alien old by any measure, her carapace dull and hairline cracked, her 4 limbs tucked close in the posture Darren had learned, in 18 months on this posting, meant cold or hungry or both. She was of the Thesivori. He knew the species well enough to recognize the wide, oil-dark eyes and the secondary mouth that most humans kept staring at for too long. She was watching him eat with the patient intensity of something that had long since stopped expecting charity. Darren looked at his sandwich. He looked at her. "You hungry?" he said. She didn't answer. The Thesivori communicated vocally, but some of them, the old ones especially, had learned that humans didn't always want an answer to their questions. They asked things to fill space, not to receive information. He held the sandwich out anyway, half of it wrapped in the wax paper it had come in. She took it. No rush, no performance of gratitude. She folded the paper back, examined the contents with those vast dark eyes, and began to eat with an economy that told him she'd done this before, eaten in a way that made the food last, stretched every bite. Darren finished his half standing up. He'd learned not to sit when he was tired. It made it harder to leave. He looked out over the transit hub. 1,000 species, 1,000 errands. Somewhere out past the reinforced viewport, a consortium cruiser was pulling into dock at berth 44, running lights rippling red to green. He watched it without much interest. "You are the one they call the running man," the old woman said. Darren turned, sorry. "The one who patrols," she chewed carefully, "the one they say cannot be stopped." He almost laughed. "I think you've got me confused with someone." "No," she said, and her secondary mouth, the smaller one beneath the first, the one humans always stared at, was closed, which meant she was certain. "I have watched you for 3 mornings. You are methodical. You see things others do not see, and you stopped for me." "I had half a sandwich." "Most would not stop." He shrugged. He wasn't built for flattery, either giving or receiving it. He picked up his patrol bag, checked his sidearm out of habit, and started to move. "The ones in the blue corridor," the old woman said behind him. "They are not what they appear." He stopped. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was folding the waxed paper into a small, neat rectangle. "Blue corridor," he repeated. 3 levels up. They move wrong. She tucked the folded paper into a fold of her outer wrap. "A human who moves wrong draws attention. Yours is a species that notices wrongness in other humans more than in any alien. You see the tells." Darren looked at the ceiling, or rather at the floor 3 levels above him. I'll take a pass. You do not have to tell anyone I said so. He thought about that for a moment. What's your name? Thighs, she said, though it will not be useful to you. He had no idea what she meant by that. He left, taking the stairs. The blue corridor was exactly as loud and crowded as the rest of VOS 7, which meant Darren had to slow down and actually look. Most of his patrolling was pattern recognition. He'd done it long enough that anomalies stood out to him the way a wrong note stands out to a musician, not consciously, not in language, just as a wrongness in the rhythm. There were 3 of them near the junction at Corridor 7B, human-looking. 2 men, 1 woman. The woman was checking a bag. The first man was watching the crowd. The second man was watching the first man. That was the tell. Partners didn't watch each other. They watched the environment in complementary directions. These 3 were synced in a way that wasn't natural, a coordination that felt mechanical, rehearsed at some level that went below conscious behavior. Darren kept walking. He calmed base 6. Belaver, said the voice on the other end. Superintendent Marin Belaver, his immediate superior. A woman who communicated primarily in size and who had, over the course of their professional relationship, developed a sigh specifically calibrated to express the sentiment Akafar, I swear to every deity in this galaxy. I've got 3 individuals, Corridor 7B, Level 4, Darren said. Moving wrong. Define wrong. Coordinated wrong. The kind of coordination that doesn't come from training, comes from, he paused. I don't know yet. That's useful. I thought you'd appreciate the ambiguity. Another sigh, this one slightly different from the standard model. I'll pull the corridor feeds. Keep eyes on them, don't engage. Darren kept walking, circling wide to approach from the transit flow. He bought a cup of something hot and brown from a vendor. It smelled like coffee the way a photograph smells like the place it was taken, and found a position near the wall where he could watch. The trio moved to the boarding queue for a planetary shuttle bound for Meridian Station. Standard passenger craft, 42 berths. Darren ran the departure time in his head, 16 minutes. Belaver came back in his ear, feeds showing them boarding at last 3 stops. Came in on the Helix line from Proscenium Colony. You know what's on Proscenium? Dye manufacturers and one very sad agricultural depot. Also, Belaver said, and there was a quality in her voice that wasn't a sigh, wasn't irritation, was something lower and more careful. The site of last month's disappearances. The ones that got classified level red before the report even cleared the station. Darren watched the 3 of them. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were standing in a queue. One of the men smiled at something the woman said. It was a perfect smile, symmetrical, appropriate in duration, the right amount of teeth. It was wrong. Don't let them board, Darren said. On what grounds? On the grounds that I'm telling you they're wrong. Akefir. Pull the queue. Tell them there's a mechanical delay. Give me time. A long pause. The particular kind that meant Belaver was weighing what it would cost her versus what it might cost everyone if he was right. You've got 4 minutes, she said, and if you're wrong, you're buying me a real sandwich. He wasn't wrong. He approached from the left, which put him inside the woman's peripheral vision before the men's. Close quarters, crowd pressure, no room for a scene. He identified himself in 3 languages out of professional habit and asked them to step aside for a standard check. The first man, the one who'd been doing the environmental watch, turned to face him. And for just a second, something moved across that face that wasn't human, not in any way Darren could describe with precision. It wasn't a twitch or a change of expression. It was a lag, a processing pause, like a very good machine deciding between outputs. Of course, the man said, and his voice was exactly right. Warm, cooperative, slight accent that placed him in the outer colonies. Darren had his hand on his sidearm. Outside the queue, please. The second man shifted his weight. Darren caught it, the weight transfer of someone about to run, or about to do something worse than run. "Don't," Darren said. He didn't say it loudly. He said it the way you say something you mean entirely. What happened next was the kind of chaos that doesn't look like chaos from the outside. It looks like a brief, ugly rearrangement of people in a corridor, punctuated by one very loud sound and one that was quieter but somehow worse. The first man moved on Darren with a speed and strength that wasn't normal, wasn't enhanced human normal, wasn't even the kind of normal you got from the combat assistance frames that some private security outfits used. It was something else, something built. Darren took the hit across his left shoulder and let the momentum carry him into a controlled stumble, not because he couldn't absorb it, but because he needed the man off balance when he came back around. He took him down hard against the boarding barrier. The woman was already running. The second man turned toward the crowd, and Darren shouted a single word in 3 languages that translated roughly to clear the path, which the crowd, bless the transit hub, bless the universal instinct to get out of the way when someone official is shouting, largely obeyed. The second man cleared the crowd and ran. What followed was 22 minutes that Darren would later describe to Believer as the most inconvenient thing that has ever happened to me on my lunch break. He tracked the second man through 4 levels of the transit hub, through a maintenance tunnel that smelled of ozone and old hydraulics, up an exterior service ladder in the cold of the station's outer ring, where the artificial gravity stuttered, and Darren's already pulled hamstring made its feelings known at significant volume, and finally onto a freight loading platform where the man stopped because there was nowhere else to go. He stood at the edge of the platform. Below was a 4-level drop to the cargo deck. Darren stood 10 meters back, hands up and open. "Don't." The man looked at him, that same lag. That same processing pause. "You can't contain what's coming," the man said. "I'm not trying to contain anything. I'm trying to talk to you." "Talk?" The man said it like the word was a kind of foreign object he was holding at arm's length. "What are you?" Darren asked. Something in the face changed, something that was almost sadness. "Perfect," the man said. "We were made to be perfect." And then he jumped. Darren got to the edge fast enough to see him hit the cargo deck below, hit it and get up, which wasn't possible, which happened anyway, which was the moment Darren understood this was very much above his pay grade. He got on the comm. "Believer." The second one jumped 4 levels and walked away. "Static then, say again." "Jumped 4 levels, walked." "I need a containment team, and I need someone to tell me what I'm actually dealing with." A very long pause, longer than the previous pauses, which had been significant. "Come back to the main deck," Believer said, her voice flat in the way that meant she was processing something she didn't want to process. "Leave the platform, now." He went back. He left the platform. He took the stairs because the elevator felt like a bad idea. His shoulder ached where the first man had hit him, and he had that particular hollow feeling in his stomach that came from realizing a situation was larger than its visible edges. The debrief room was small and smelled of recycled air. Believer sat across from him with a mug she wasn't drinking from and a data pad she'd turned face down. "The 2 you contained," she said. "Medical is going to run a full workup, but preliminary scans are," she paused. "Preliminary scans are suggesting composite tissue, organic components from multiple sources bound with synthetic material." She picked up the mug, put it down. "The short version is that someone has been building people." "Building," Darren said. "Custom building, strength, speed, processing speed, all above human baseline. Emotional responses patterned for plausibility but not depth. They can pass in a crowd. They passed in how many crowds before today?" "The woman got away." "The woman got away." She turned the data pad over, turned it back. "The one who jumped. He survived the fall. We found blood on the cargo deck, his blood. But he wasn't there." What's the through line? Darren said. Proscenium, the disappearances, these three. We don't know. Someone's building a population, one that looks human but isn't. He thought about it. That's not a project, that's a program. That requires infrastructure, supply chains, time. Who has that kind of resources? Believer was quiet. Who are you not telling me about? She looked at him for a long moment. There's a name, a physician, has a facility on the outer ring, classified location, classified funding. The composites we pulled from the queue, both of them have the same tissue signature in the synthetic binding material. Our analysts say it's a proprietary compound. Traceable, if you know what you're looking for. Do we know what we're looking for? Someone does, Believer said. Above my clearance level, above yours. So what do I do? Go home, she said. Get some sleep. You've been on for 32 hours. And the program that's building composite humans and infiltrating transit hubs is above your clearance level. He stood up. His shoulder hurt. His hamstring hurt. He was hungry again. Believer, he said at the door. HFY. That bloody chicken wasn't killed, he said. It died of old age. She stared at him. The sandwich from the commissary, 2 weeks ago. You remember what you said about it. Why are you telling me this? I don't know, he said honestly. I'm very tired. He went home. He did not sleep particularly well. 3 days later, the program tried to kill him. This was, in retrospect, the clearest indication that he'd been asking the right questions. Organizations with something to hide didn't kill people who were asking the wrong questions. They only moved against people who were getting close. The attempt was professional. A woman, composite, he realized afterward, though he hadn't known to look at the time, who appeared to be a maintenance technician working on the environmental controls in his residential corridor. She'd had the right uniform, the right tools, the right manner. She'd been wrong in the way the three at the transit queue had been wrong. He hadn't clocked it until she moved. He had a bruised rib afterward, and a very clear understanding that he was dealing with something that knew his face, knew his schedule, and had decided he was a problem. He went back to Believer, who had been expecting him. They came at you, she said. Apparently I'm a loose end. Which means what you saw at the transit hub was important enough to protect. She sat back. A physician named Vethris Bond, Outer Ring, Sector 12. The compound signature traces to her laboratory. I don't have enough to move on it officially. The clearance blocks are. I'm not asking to move on it officially. She looked at him. I'm not authorizing an unofficial operation. I'm not asking for authorization. A pause. What are you asking for? An address, he said. And someone to answer the comm if I find something I can't explain. She gave him the address. She didn't give him anything else, and he didn't ask. The Sector 12 facility was large, larger than he'd expected, hidden inside a block of what appeared to be industrial water reclamation equipment. The kind of operation that costs more to build than most colony stations generate in a decade. He went in at the second watch, through a maintenance access that the structural schematics on file didn't mention, but which his eye for things that don't match had found on a surface scan. Inside it was cold, deliberately cold, the kind of temperature that wasn't about comfort but about preservation. Long corridors, white light, the soft hum of biological containment systems. He moved through 3 rooms of equipment before he found the ones that stopped him. They were in growth matrices, dozens of them, bodies in various stages. He couldn't think of a better word of completion. Some barely more than frameworks, some fully formed, suspended in pale gel, eyes closed, features slack. All of them human. All of them wrong in the same way, in the too symmetrical, too considered way that the 3 at the transit hub had been wrong. He stood there for a long moment. Then he kept moving. He had a job to do. The physician's office was at the center of the complex. A room full of the kind of ordered chaos that very intelligent people generate when they've been working in isolation for a long time. Data walls, specimen cases, a personal history written in the debris of dedicated work. And behind the main console, working at this hour of the night as though day and night were abstract concepts someone else worried about, the physician herself. She was older than he'd expected, small, intense in the way of people who have been working toward something for so long that the work had become the self. She didn't hear him come in. He was good at not being heard. He watched her for a moment before he spoke. She was reviewing something, cellular data, protein maps, the language of constructed life. She was making notes in a manner that was entirely unhurried, as though time pressure had stopped applying to her some years ago. "Dr. Bond," he said. She turned. No panic, no reaching for anything. She looked at him with the patient recognition of someone who had been expecting a knock at the door for a very long time and had made their peace with it. "Corporal," she said, "I wondered when the Corps would find me. I'm not exactly here in a Corps capacity." "No, you're here because 3 of my people flagged your recognition at the transit hub, and then one of them was foolish enough to overreact." She turned back to the console. She always was reactive, a flaw in the emotional patterning. "I've been working on it." "You built people," Darren said. "I improved people," a distinction that mattered to her. He could hear it. The composites are not a lesser thing, they are a refined thing. Stronger, more efficient, more capable of operating in environments that regular humans find limiting. "Who are they for?" "Who?" She turned again. "They are not for anyone, they are what comes next." He thought about the man who jumped 4 levels and walked away. Who's funding this? That is a more interesting question. She moved to a secondary console, pulled up a display. The organizational tree that appeared was deep and complex, names, agencies, entities, threaded through each other like the tissue structure in the growth matrices. "I have been funded at various times and in various capacities by individuals who believe that humanity's next stage requires engineering, and by others who are," she paused, "not humans at all, who have their own reasons for wanting what I'm building." Darren's hand was on his sidearm. "Non-humans. Humans are not the only ones who see the potential in a malleable, compelling to observe, biologically versatile species." She said it clinically. "You have been watched for a very long time, Corporal, not because you are a threat, because you are a resource." And the composites. Insurance. A population that moves among you, indistinguishable until necessary. Not malicious, not destructive unless required. They are the key that opens the door when opening the door becomes necessary. He had a lot of questions. He asked the most immediate one. Where does the chain go above you, the funding, the real chain? She smiled. It was a real smile, not a composite smile. Further than you can follow tonight. Try me. She studied him for a moment. Then, there is an entity. I have met her twice. She presents as a variety of things, diplomat, vagrant, physician, pilgrim, depending on what she needs to be. I do not know her real form. I don't believe she has one in any sense we would recognize. What I know is that she is very old, that she has been present in this part of the galaxy since before Terran civilization developed written language, and that she has a particular interest in humanity that is, another pause, longer, affectionate, which is perhaps the most unsettling thing about her. Affectionate, Darren said. She finds you interesting. She finds your stubbornness interesting, your adaptability interesting, your specific brand of communal warmth interesting. She has been cultivating is not quite the right word. Watching, occasionally nudging. The physician turned back to her console. My work is, at least in part, her investment. She wants to see what you become. Darren's mind went, for no reason he could locate, to the transit hub. The lower observation deck. A small alien woman with dull cracked carapace, folding wax paper into a neat rectangle. What does she look like? he asked. When she presents as, you said she presents as a variety of things. Old, she tends toward old, diminished, something that would be easy to overlook. A slight shift in the physician's posture, something that might have been amusement. I believe she finds it informative. What you do when you think no one important is watching. Darren stood very still. I need to make some calls, he said. What came next wasn't his operation. He was clear about that then and afterward. He flagged Belaver. Belaver flagged someone above her. That someone flagged 2 levels above themselves. What arrived at Sector 12 within the hour was a response team with clearances Darren had never seen codes for, accompanied by a diplomatic attaché from the consortium liaison office who looked like she hadn't slept in a week, and who did not appear surprised by anything she saw in the facility. Darren stood in the corridor outside the physician's office while the team swept the complex. The attaché stopped beside him. Corporal Akafer, she said. You know my name. You've been on a watch list for the past 8 months, flagged as someone likely to stumble into this. She looked at the door to the physician's office. We didn't expect it to happen this fast. Watch list. Not the bad kind. She turned to look at him directly. She was human, he was fairly certain enough. The kind we maintain when someone has the specific combination of observational ability, stubborn persistence, and she chose her next word with care. Ethical clarity. That tends to produce useful results even when pointed at problems we can't officially address. The composites will handle containment. The physician's operation will secure the network. Most of the composites in the matrices are viable. There will be significant questions about what to do with them. She said it without drama, the way you discuss significant questions when you've already decided you'll find a way. The funding chain is complex, international, interspecies. She mentioned an entity, Darren said. Old, has been here a long time, has an affectionate interest in humanity. The attaché's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. That's above my clearance level, she said. Is there anything that isn't above someone's clearance level in this situation? A silence. Then, she's real if that's what you're asking. She's not a story the physician invented. She is a significant presence. Very old, very patient. A pause. As far as we can tell, she doesn't mean harm. Her interest in humanity is, she stopped, started again. She has moved through your history at intervals in forms that let her observe without distorting. What she does with those observations, we don't entirely know. Darren thought about the transit hub again. The sandwich. The old woman eating with an economy that said she'd done this before, stretched every bite. You watch me for 3 mornings, he'd said. Methodical, she'd said. You see things others do not see, and you stopped for me. I have to make a call, Darren said. He went back to the transit hub at 5th watch, when the crowds were thin, and the vendors were restocking, and the light through the viewports was the particular gray that precedes either dawn or disappointment. He went to the lower observation deck, and he stood by the cooling struts. She wasn't there. He sat down against the wall where she'd been, and he stayed there for a while, not because he thought she'd come back. He didn't know what he thought, but because he was very tired and his shoulder still ached, and the cleaning drones that moved through at this hour made a sound that was almost like company. He didn't know what she was. He didn't know the shape of the thing beneath the dull carapace and the patient eyes and the careful way she'd folded the wax paper. He didn't know if affectionate was the right word, or if there was a right word in any language he could read, for whatever a very old entity felt when it had been watching a young, loud, awkward, stubborn species find its way across a galaxy that hadn't asked them to come. He thought about the man at the edge of the platform. Perfect, the man had said. We were made to be perfect. He thought about the sandwich, half of it handed over without ceremony. He thought about Belaver's voice when she'd said the one who jumped 4 levels walked away. That flat, processing quality, the sound of someone recalibrating their understanding of what was possible. He thought about the composite woman in the maintenance uniform, who had been patient and professional and wrong in a way he'd felt before he'd understood it, and the physician in the cold room, making notes by the light of data she'd spent years generating, and the attaché whose clearances went somewhere he couldn't see, and all the levels above and below and threaded through each other, all the investments and interests and long games being played at speeds he couldn't entirely track. What you do when you think no one important is watching. He'd had half a sandwich. He'd had tired feet and a pulled hamstring and a quiet irritation at the universe for being difficult. And there had been an old woman sitting against a wall, and he'd thought, that looks like someone who hasn't eaten. He had not done it for any reason that would look good in a report. He hadn't done it because it was policy, or because someone was watching, or because he was trying to be something. He'd done it because it was half a sandwich and he wasn't that hungry and she was. He didn't think that was sufficient to explain the scale of what had followed. On the other hand, he wasn't sure it wasn't. 6 weeks after the Sector 12 operation, Darren was summoned to an address he didn't recognize in the consortium quarter of VOS 7, the upper levels, the ones with actual windows, where the light was real rather than simulated, and the air tasted like something other than recycled recycling. The room was large and sparsely furnished and had the quality of a space that was not regularly inhabited but was very precisely maintained. A woman was waiting in it. Old. Thesivori, apparently, dull-cracked carapace, wide dark eyes, 4 limbs arranged in that tucked posture he recognized. Not the same body as before, he was fairly certain. The oil dark of the eyes was the same. The quality of stillness was the same. "Corporal," she said. "V-thighs," he said. She gestured to a chair across from her. He sat. "You have been busy," she said. There was a network of composite humans being built to infiltrate Terran populations, he said, tended to feel pressing. "Yes," a pause. "You handled it well." "My boss handled it. The response team handled it. I found a corner of it and pulled on it until the rest became visible. That is handling it well." He looked at her for a long moment. "What are you?" "Old," she said. It was the same tone the physician had used. Matter of fact, slightly wry, not particularly interested in the drama of the disclosure. "The physician said you've been in this part of the galaxy since before we had written language." "Approximately." "She said you have an affectionate interest in humanity." The secondary mouth, smaller, beneath the first, curved in a way that he'd never seen a Thesivori expression do before. It looked like the real version of the composite smile, the one that came from something actual. "You are difficult not to be interested in," she said. "You are loud, you are argumentative. You form attachments to other species with a speed that most species find alarming. You are extraordinarily bad at admitting when you're lost, and extraordinarily good at finding your way anyway. You take things apart to see how they work and then are surprised when they don't go back together the same way." She paused. "You share sandwiches with strangers." "Half a sandwich," he said, with no expectation of anything in return. She looked hungry. "Yes," Vithai said, "she did." A long quiet settled over the room. Outside the actual window, the light of VOS Station's day cycle was doing something with the atmospheric processors that made the horizon genuinely beautiful. "The physician," Darren said, "the composites, the funding chain. How much of that was your investment?" "Some," she said honestly. "I was curious what the physician would build. I was curious what would happen when someone found it. I was not," she chose the word carefully, "I was not entirely certain of the outcome." "That's a hell of a thing to be uncertain about." "I have been uncertain about many of your outcomes," she said. "You are consistently more interesting than the most likely projection." "Were the composites going to be used to hurt anyone?" "Not by design. The physician's intent was evolutionary, not hostile." A pause. The entities who were co-funding her work had intentions I am less certain about. It is possible that without your intervention the situation would have developed in directions that were, a delicate pause, less benign. So you pointed me at it, Darren said. The blue corridor. I gave you information, she said. You made the choices. You could have handled it yourself. An entity who's been in this part of the galaxy since before we had writing, you have resources, contacts, clearances that go higher than the attaché's clearances, I'm guessing. Considerably. So why? He stopped. He thought about what the attaché had said, what you do when you think no one important is watching. You wanted to see if we'd handle it. I wanted to see if you'd handle it, she said. Humanity, as a matter of general principle. And she looked at him with those wide, dark eyes. She folded her hands in her lap with the same neat economy she'd used on the wax paper. You found 3 composites in a crowd because they moved wrong, she said. You chased one across 4 levels on a pulled hamstring. You went into the facility alone because waiting for authorization would have cost time you didn't think you had. You stood in the room with the physician and you listened to her, really listened, and you asked the right questions. And then you went back to the transit hub and sat against the wall at 5th watch because she tilted her head. Why did you go back? He thought about it. I don't know, he said. I wanted to know if you were okay. The secondary mouth curved again. I own, she said, a significant portion of this galaxy's commercial routing infrastructure, 3 research stations, and what you might describe as administrative influence over the consortium's outer governance board. She let that sit for a moment. I am, empirically, fine. Darren absorbed this information. He thought about the transit hub, the cooling struts, half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. You were testing whether I was not testing, she said firmly. I was observing. There is a difference. Testing implies I controlled the conditions. I did not. You chose to sit down or not entirely on your own terms. A pause. Most people walk past. Most people are in a hurry. Most people assume that something diminished cannot be important. She looked at him steadily. You did not make that assumption. You saw someone who looked cold and hungry and you acted on what you saw, without consideration of status or return, without checking if it was policy. She paused again. That is the thing I find most interesting about your species. Not the adaptability, not the stubbornness, not the remarkable capacity for violence that you so rarely deploy as a first option. It is this, the reflex toward, she searched for the word, toward ordinary grace. Darren sat with that for a moment. I'm going to be honest, he said. I feel like I should say something profound here. I'm not finding it. You don't need to. You own routing infrastructure, among other things. And you sit against walls in transit hubs. Occasionally, she said, when I want to know what people are actually like. He looked out the actual window. The light was doing something remarkable with the atmospheric processors. He thought, I should tell Belaver. He thought, Belaver is going to sigh in a way I've never heard before. What do you do with what you observe? He asked. The long game, the investment, what's the outcome you're working toward? I do not know, she said. He looked at her. I am very old, she said. I have observed many species through many stages of development. Some of them arrived at something I would call flourishing. Some did not. Yours, she considered. Yours is the most genuinely uncertain case I have encountered. You have every quality required for either profound flourishing or spectacular failure, and the scales have been balanced near perfectly for longer than your recorded history. She met his eyes. I have not previously encountered a species where the smallest moments, a sandwich at 5th watch, a choice to stop rather than keep walking, seem to carry as much weight on those scales as the large ones. That is an unsettling thing to say. Yes, she agreed, I am sorry. Are you tipping the scales? Darren said. With the composite program, with pointing me at the blue corridor, are you tipping them? She was quiet for a long moment. "I am watching," she said, "and occasionally I sit in a transit hub and I see what you do." She folded her hands again. "That is all." He didn't entirely believe that. He wasn't sure she was entirely lying, either. He suspected the truth was somewhere in the category of things that needed longer than one lifetime to see clearly. "Okay," he said. She looked mildly surprised. "Okay." "I'm a corporal in the Terran Expeditionary Corps," he said. "I patrol transit hubs. I have a pulled hamstring and a bruised rib, and I haven't slept more than 6 consecutive hours in 2 months. The scale of what you're describing is," he breathed out, "it's a lot." "Yes. But I'm still going to go to work tomorrow, and I'm going to walk that corridor and look for the things that are wrong. And if I have half a sandwich, I'm going to share it if someone looks hungry." He met her eyes. "That's what I've got." The secondary mouth curved. The primary one curved too. He hadn't seen that before, both at once. It looked, he thought, very much like what joy looks like in a face that has learned to keep it small. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly what you've got." He ran into Believer on the transit deck an hour later. She was eating a sandwich, real bread, real filling, from the level 3 baker, and regarding the crowd with the expression of someone who had recently revised their understanding of several things and was working through the implications. "HFY," she said. "Believer. You were in the consortium quarter." "I was. With the entity." He looked at her. "How do you know about the entity?" "Clearance came through this morning." "Level," she checked her data pad. "There are more levels than I knew existed. I have been cleared to know that there is an entity." She took a bite of her sandwich. "That is the sum total of my clearance." "She's fine," Darren said. "The entity who has been here since before we had written language and owns galaxy-scale infrastructure." "She was cold," Darren said, "and hungry, I think, or something that looked like it." Believer chewed. "You gave her half your sandwich." "I didn't know who she was." "You never know who anyone is." She said it with something that wasn't quite affection but was something adjacent to it, the way many of her expressions were something adjacent to something warmer than she typically permitted. "That's your whole," she gestured vaguely. "Thing." He considered this. "Is that a compliment?" "No," she said, "obviously not." He considered it some more. He looked out over the transit hub, the 1,000 species, the 1,000 errands, the vast consortium cruiser at berth 44 running its lights through green to gold now, prepping for departure. All those lives moving past each other, mostly without looking, mostly in a hurry, mostly assuming that what was diminished was not important. "Believer," he said. "Don't. I'm not going to say anything profound." "Good. I was just going to ask if you want to get another sandwich." He paused. "A real one." She looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a woman who had learned, over a long career, to expect the worst and was repeatedly surprised to get something different. "HFY," she said. "Yeah. It's only just beginning," she said, and took another bite of her sandwich. He thought, somewhere in a room with actual windows, an old woman with oil-dark eyes is watching the patterns of the universe and finding them, against all probability, worth continuing to watch. He thought that will have to be enough. It was. The next morning, Darren went back to work. He took the stairs to the lower observation deck at the start of his shift, before the crowds thickened and the vendors opened, and the transit hub became the particular kind of noise that made thinking difficult. He stood for a while by the cooling struts with a cup of the brown thing that was trying to be coffee, watching the level fill up the way a tide comes in, gradually, then all at once. He was thinking about composites. Not the ones in the Sector 12 facility, which were now in the hands of people with clearances that went places he couldn't follow. He was thinking about the concept of them. The idea that you could build something that looked like a human, moved like a human, smiled at the right times and said the right words and passed in a crowd of tens of thousands, and still be wrong. Still carry some tell in the timing of the reactions, the calibration of the expressions, some fundamental gap between the performed warmth and the thing that was supposed to be underneath it. He'd been thinking about this for days. Not anxiously, he wasn't prone to that flavor of thinking, but with the methodical, turning over quality that he applied to problems he hadn't fully understood yet. The tell wasn't in the composites' faces or their voices. It was in the relationships between them, the way they watched each other instead of the environment, the way their coordination was too tight, too perfect, too absent of the small frictions and miscommunications that real people generated constantly without noticing. What made a human real in the way that mattered wasn't any individual quality. It was the mess of the connections, the imperfect calibration, the way Believer would sigh at him and then hand him a lead she hadn't officially given him, the way the crowd in that transit corridor had parted when he shouted, not because they'd been programmed to, but because someone sounding like that, urgent, cert, human, triggered something old and communal and real. He was still standing there when his comm pinged. Believer. There's a thing, she said. There's always a thing. Level 9. One of the composites from Sector 12, the ones they transported to the medical facility on the upper ring. A pause. Walked out. Walked out how? Opened the door and walked out. The staff. Another pause. The staff apparently didn't try to stop him. When they were asked about this afterward, several of them reported that it hadn't occurred to them that they should. That's not, he stopped, he thought about it, that's a new capability. The analysts are calling it passive influence, presence-based. The composite doesn't need to actively do anything, the effect is environmental. She didn't sigh. She was saving sighs for something larger. We don't know how many others have it. Where did he go? We don't know. Is he a threat? We don't know that either. A pause. The physician is cooperating with the debrief team. She says the passive influence wasn't intentional. She says she doesn't know how it developed. She says, Believer paused with an emphasis that said she was quoting directly. She says it might be a sign that the composites are developing beyond her original parameters. Developing. Like people do. Darren thought about the man at the edge of the cargo platform. Perfect, the man had said. We were made to be perfect. And in his eyes, in the moment before the jump, something that was almost sadness. Where should I look? He said. If I knew that, Believer said, I'd send someone with a higher clearance level. And instead you're sending me. You're the one who finds things that move wrong, she said, and ended the call. He finished his coffee. He set the cup down on the cooling strut ledge with the particular deliberateness of a man deciding to take something seriously. He went to level 9. He found the composite in the observation gallery above the main boarding concourse, a wide, curved space with a transparent floor panel that let you see the concourse below, usually inhabited by parents watching for arriving relatives and children pressing their faces against the floor panel to watch the crowds. At this hour, it was nearly empty. The composite was a young man, or appeared to be. Dark hair, slight build, the face of someone who might have been 25 or might have been built to look 25. He was standing at the center of the floor panel, looking down through the transparent surface at the concourse below, with the stillness of someone who had found something they were trying to understand. Darren came in slowly, no urgency, no hand near the sidearm. Hey, he said. The composite turned. He looked at Darren with the wide, patient attention that Darren was starting to recognize as a specific thing, not the mechanical processing pause of the three at the queue, not the calculated warmth of the woman who'd come for him in the corridor. Something newer. Something less finished. You're not going to try to bring me back, the composite said. I was going to ask what you're looking at first. The composite looked back down through the floor panel. All of them, he said. Darren moved to stand beside him. Below, the concourse did its usual work. The 1,000 species, the 1,000 errands. Someone was crying by gate 41. Someone else was laughing at something their companion had said, one of those laughs that doubles you over. 3 children were playing a game involving the departure screen numbers that had no visible rules but enormous apparent stakes. I was made from some of them, the composite said. He said it without drama as a fact he was working through. Parts of them, not the memories, just the structure. Does that bother you? A pause. I don't know. I keep trying to locate where I feel about it and finding. He tilted his head. Gaps where I expect to find something. That's not unique to composites, Darren said. The young man looked at him. Humans locate gaps where they expect to find something, Darren said. Constantly. It's sort of the condition. But you know what you are. We know what we call ourselves, Darren said. The knowing what we are part is ongoing. He watched the child playing the departure screen game make a choice that apparently changed everything. The other 2 erupted. What's your name? A long pause. I don't have one. The physician used numbers. What would you call yourself if you were going to? Another pause, longer. The composite seemed to genuinely consider this, not as a performance, but as a real question he hadn't been asked before. I don't know yet, he finally said. Okay, Darren said. You've got time. Do I? He looked at Darren with the wide, patient attention again. The people who are looking for me. I'm the people looking for you, Darren said. And I'm talking to you, which is the main thing I needed to do. You're not going to take me back to the medical facility. Darren thought about the physician in the cold room. The long data walls. The ordered chaos of someone who had been building towards something for decades, and the composites in the growth matrices, suspended in pale gel, features slack, waiting to be finished. Not today, he said. I'm going to need to make some calls. There are going to be processes, people with clearances I don't have making decisions about, he paused. About what you are, and what that means for everyone. That sounds like being property. It sounds like being new, Darren said. New is complicated. New takes time to figure out. He looked back down at the concourse. Every species you see down there was new at some point. Most of them have a period they'd rather not talk about. The composite was quiet for a while. Below, the child who'd made the departure screen move erupted in a dance that was entirely out of proportion to the victory and entirely appropriate to it. She told me about you, the composite said. Darren looked at him. The physician. She said there was a corporal who found the 3 at the transit queue. She said he came in alone. A pause. She said he listened to her. She seemed surprised by that. That someone came into her facility and listened instead of just a gesture. She was building composite people and funding an infiltration network, Darren said. Listening had its limits. But you listened first. He didn't have a good answer for that. He had a half-formed sense that it was the only way to understand anything. You had to listen before you knew what to do about it. But it didn't feel like something that required saying out loud. What do you want? Darren asked. Right now, not the big question, just right now. The composite thought about it. Genuinely thought, the way you think when the answer matters. To stay here for a while, he said, and watch them. Okay, Darren said. He sat down on the bench at the edge of the observation gallery. He stretched his legs out. His hamstring had mostly healed, mostly. The composite stood at the floor panel for a while longer, watching the concourse. Then, slowly, he came and sat on the other end of the bench. They watched together. Below, the crowd did what crowds do, moved and stopped and moved again, found each other and lost each other, carried things and worried things, and occasionally, for no apparent reason, just stood still and looked up, as if checking whether the ceiling was still there, as if making sure the universe had not made any changes while they weren't paying attention. Darren's calm was quiet. He turned the volume down, not off. a distinction Belaver would have opinions about. The composite. The young man, Darren was going to call him a young man. It was a description as good as any, turned to look at him after a long while. The woman at the wall, he said. The Thesavari, the one you gave the sandwich to. Darren looked at him. The physician mentioned her. She said the entity had been observing the project. He paused. She said the entity was very old and very patient. She said she had been watching humanity for a very long time. Yes, Darren said. Does she know how it ends? The young man asked. For humans, does she know if it ends well? Darren thought about what Vithais had said. The scales balanced near perfectly, the smallest moments carrying weight. An entity who was very old and very patient, and who had come to a transit hub and sat against a wall to see what you did when you thought no one important was watching. I don't think she knows, he said. I think that's why she's still watching. The young man absorbed this. That is, he searched for the word, terrible. Little bit, Darren agreed. And also, I don't know, kind of the point. The point of what? Of doing anything, Darren said. If the outcome was guaranteed, it would just be execution of a predetermined result. The fact that it isn't, he looked at the crowd below. The crying person at gate 41 had been found by someone who'd recognized the crying and come over and was now sitting with them, not saying anything, just there. The fact that it isn't is why any of it matters. The young man was quiet for a very long time. I don't know if I'm going to be good, he said, finally, quietly. I was made for a purpose, and the purpose, I don't know if the purpose was good, and I don't know if what I am, what's in me, I don't know if it inclines toward. Neither does anyone else, Darren said, when they start. But they have history. They have what they came from. They have people who shaped them before they were shaped. Some of them, Darren said. Not all, he looked at him. The fact that you're asking the question is, it's not nothing. The young man looked at him. The composites who came for me, Darren said. In the corridor, the one who tried to, she didn't stop to ask. She had a task and she executed it. He paused. You walked out of a medical facility and came up here to look at people through a floor panel and ask whether you're going to be good. He breathed out. That's different. Below, a woman had found a child who'd wandered from a group. The child was small and terrified, and the woman, who was of a species with 6 limbs and a luminescent collar marking, had no visible idea what human children needed. She was crouching to its level anyway, all 6 limbs folded back so as to be smaller, less alarming, and making a sound that was clearly an attempt to be soothing even though it was not calibrated for human auditory comfort. The child was crying. The alien woman kept making the sound. After a while, the child started laughing, which was not the intended response, but seemed to be the right one. The young man beside Darren watched this with the wide, patient attention. Okay, he said softly. Darren nodded. They stayed on the bench until the morning crowd had fully come in, and the transit hub had become the particular kind of noise that made thinking difficult. Then Darren made his calls, careful ones, with people who had the right clearances, who he'd gotten contact information for through Belaver, who understood the concept of a situation requiring patience over procedure. The young man cooperated. He was not taken back to the medical facility. There were processes, as Darren had promised, complicated, slow, full of people with opinions. But they were processes aimed at figuring out what was right rather than what was expedient, which was not nothing. Darren went back to his patrol route. He walked the standard circuit through the transit hub. He checked the junctions and the boarding queues and the maintenance tunnels. He watched for things that moved wrong. He bought a cup of the brown thing and stood by the cooling struts on the lower observation deck for a few minutes and looked at the space where an old woman with oil-dark eyes had once sat, patient and cold, watching a young corporal eat his lunch. He thought, somewhere in the galaxy, a very old entity who owns routing infrastructure and 3 research stations is watching the patterns of something vast and uncertain, and trying to determine how it ends. He thought, I have half a shift left and a hamstring that's almost healed. He thought that'll have to do. He finished his coffee, he went back to work. The crowds moved around him, loud and purposeful and imperfectly calibrated and entirely real. The transit hub hummed with the collective weight of 10,000 species trying to get somewhere. A consortium cruiser at berth 44 shifted its running lights from gold to white, signaling final boarding. Somewhere on level 9, a young man with no name yet was deciding what he was going to be. Darren Ackafer walked his circuit and watched for the things that were wrong, and occasionally stopped when something was simply in need of stopping for. It wasn't enough. It also was.